but I see more and more people not being able to deal with what's around them and what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, like you're saying, obviously we're living in a time of uncertainty. I think the world has never been so uncertain ever. I think these global, forever lasting alliances that we have grown up with, I think are quickly now shattering into uncertainty. So the old Western alliance now versus the Asian or whatever you want to say bloc uh, is sort of like trying to find its place now in the world, and then especially now US, I think, has lost a lot of credibility and trust. I think Europe, we're sort of stuck in the middle. We don't know if we're supposed to like continue being loyal to the US, even though they're continuing to bashing us, threatening us, leaving our military support, etc., etc. So I think, yeah, we do live in a very unique time, and I think it's hard for the Western world to realize that the world has become bipolar, in meaning like China has risen as a global power. Before we have lived like at least 40, 50 years with a complete hegemony with the US sitting on the top and being able to dictate what's going to happen in the world. But now I think China has risen as a very strong economic power, and all of a sudden now US has to uh, you know trying to figure out how to play in this new play field. So I think this is something that is interesting. Also, coming back to me living here almost 20 years, I can see how people are also having a difficulty dealing with China in the terms of sentiment towards China. You probably know this better than me, Nicky, but most people do have a negative sentiment towards China by default almost. So the reaction when I get people visiting China is almost always like the reaction becomes very strong for them when they realize that what they expected to find in China wasn't at all the reality. So the reality is something completely different. And I think that is also hard realization where you have been taught that maybe this country is, I don't know, behind or whatever it might be, rude people, blah, blah, blah. They can be a lot, yeah, strange or different in many ways. And then you realize like almost everything that you've been taught isn't correct. So I think that is something very difficult for a lot of people to deal with. But yeah, so yeah, I guess you're right with the uncertainty part.
You tackled a very interesting point, and that's the narrative that the Western world has, the opinion the Western world has about China, and it always reminds me to when you don't own the narrative, when you don't decide what is my narrative, you're always depending on someone else's narrative that you follow. And we have the same with technology. There is not a single movie coming out of Hollywood that doesn't end bad when it comes to AI or robotics or new tech or deep tech. All of them end in a terrible way, which make us suggest that is a threat and it's the world is going to go south because that's the narrative that we're being exposed to, such as the narrative about China being a threat that the Western world is being exposed to. And then when you're there, you don't feel anyone, like I didn't feel like a single person I met in China felt threatened. And the relationship to technology is completely different in China. We've been in Shenzhen and watched people in the coffee shop installing each other OpenClaw. And in Europe, they say, well, it will delete your inbox, it will write emails. There was something going viral 2 days ago where OpenClaw sent a WhatsApp message to an ex of someone reconnecting, and he was completely shocked about this. How do you see that? Like, who's responsible for the narrative? Who's giving people the trust and the curiosity, and why is that different that people in China are so open to new technology? We have delivery drones is a standard, robots in hotels walking around. Everything that feels like might happen in Europe in 10 years seems very normal in Shenzhen today.
Yeah, I think as we all know, I think China has had a couple of decades now of crazy growth, you could say, and that growth has been fueled by, I think, technology. So I think for them, technology is something that they have been reliant on for such a long time, and it's part of their welfare. And I think AI now is sort of like the new technology that countries, or well, people or countries all around the world are sort of reliant on. We all agree that this is sort of like the new internet wave that we saw in the late 90s and the beginning of the 2000s. So now I think we all agree that maybe AI is the next wave or tsunami. So I think Chinese companies are just, it's almost like they feel like it's a life and death situation in a way, but like you're saying, not in the anxious way, more like in a enthusiastic way, that they wanna make sure that they are first on this one. So I think that's why they're heavily investing in becoming like the world leaders now in AI. And as we talked about before, I think the patents is just a big indication, a strong indication, how they're also investing into becoming a leading nation in terms of innovation. And AI, of course, is a big part of that thing. But yeah, coming back to so the government itself is also heavily supporting AI rollouts. As you mentioned, the open thing, it was just a couple of weeks ago making big headlines that Tencent was actually helping people from all ages, from grandmas, grandpas to students, installing OpenClaw on their devices so they could get going working with OpenClaw. But exactly like you're saying, in Europe, I only hear negative things about OpenClaw, like horrifying scenarios, how it hijacks your wallet, how it does this, how it does that. But here, I think we're discussing all the possibilities and the the incremental in effectiveness that we can achieve using these tools. So it's a different narrative here where we focus more on opportunities and less about the threats. But I think that's a general Chinese way of thinking compared to the West, where we would like to risk assess. It's very important that we do all of these assessments again. And obviously, it is a big unknown because nobody really knows. However, I do think again here, I think like yes, productivity is a big thing here. Effectiveness is a big thing, and I do think what scares us is like we don't understand the full capability of what a human being is able to have as an output. And I think that will change dramatically in the coming years. So say if one human can produce X today, that's the maximum. In 5, 10 years, that same human will be able to produce maybe 10 or 20x what we're able to produce today. So the total output of the world will of course also increase incrementally. And I think that's the big unknown factor that scares us. So I think a lot of people are saying, including myself, I think like AI will not, replace humans in the way that we think. But I do think that people using AI will replace people that are not using AI. So I do think there is a big FOMO, and there should be a big FOMO aspect to this. And I do think that people should and need to start playing around with AI tools, um, and instead of worrying about what tool should I use and all of these type of things, because you don't have 5 years to think about it. So that's something that I would just say from my perspective, because here I'm seeing people are embracing it much faster than we're doing in the West.
When I prepared this, I decided, and that was on Monday, to have one speaker who's a fully AI persona. So I created the persona on Gemini. I used Claude. I fed Claude with 5 years of conversations during this tour so that my input is all the transcriptions, all the conversations of these tours, and then Heichen created a video. And then I just said, okay, let's talk about this, and I didn't interfere at all with it. It's not my opinion spoken by an AI. It's really what the AI come up with. And since I've been in China every year, there's also an opinion about China and what Koda is her name. She said, and I thought it's really interesting. She said, we cannot afford not to try out this technology. We cannot afford not to go into these cold waters and figure out if that works or not. It's not a is it risky to do it? It's a we cannot afford not to do it. I thought that was very
Yeah.
radical position. Johan asked me to invite him to the hot seat. Johan, unmute yourself. Good to see you, and also good to see the triangle of us again. Abigail is also in the room. We have the whole group of for a few weeks ago coming back together. Johan, good to see you.
Hi, Folke. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfectly.
I missed Shenzhen already. If I could, I would go tomorrow. Yeah,
Yeah, so it left a good impression then.
yeah, it was my second time, and the interesting thing is when I talk about it here to friends, colleagues, they don't believe me. So it's interesting that whenever you talk about what's happening in San Francisco, people believe you. But when you talk about what's happening in China, you're exaggerating. It cannot be that they have autonomous cars. We still have here this such a negative view on China that whatever you, and then I have to show videos, and photos, and then they start to believe it. But one, even in that case, told me, no, 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 this is like an AI generated video. It cannot be that Baidu has autonomous vehicles and stuff like that. So we are so much negatively biased that I don't even know if, I mean, you cannot take 600 million people from Europe to visit China and really start believing what's happening. So, but my question more, or the way I just wanted to intervene is like, I'm now involved in some projects on education, and the question that comes up more and more is, we know that China is becoming a leader in innovation. We know that the US is already a leader in innovation, and the competition is getting very tight, right? What is on the long run? How do you see the role of Europe? What can we still be good at? Because when you were talking, when you were describing this lots of analysis that we do, I remembered my times at the European Commission when I was reviewing European projects. And most of those projects are like lost, and billions were spent, on semantic web and also some preliminary AI things, and we nothing came out, as a kind of let's say daily use application. So we are extremely good on these high level studies, like interviewing millions of Europeans, what they use in the schools, for education. Of course, WhatsApp will be the primary, tool, the result, but how can we move on? Like, how can we really start dreaming bigger? Because I think we also lost the capacity to dream here in Europe. Like I see that in China, they know to ask the good questions. They know how to dream, and there's no limit. Okay, we want here a bridge which will be the highest in the world. They just do it. Here it's going to be maybe 200 years to design it.
Yeah, and that is true. I think China has been they have felt like inferior, I think would be the right word without sounding too bad. When I arrived, I felt all the time they excused themselves. Me being a European coming to their country, they said that we're too many people, we don't have as good living standard. You said I'm from Sweden. I said you from this country. They said, oh, it's such a beautiful country. Oh, it's such a rich country. Blah 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 blah. So I think they have had this like inferiority complex for a long time. So that's why they have been driven by these ambitions to catch up, to catch up, to catch up. So I think the Chinese themselves, they didn't realize, because for them, they have also been living in a bubble. So they don't realize how fast they have actually gone. So there's such a funny thing, actually, or not funny thing, but there's a crisis group for Chinese people going to vacation to Europe after vacation, like a crisis group, because people get so disappointed. So when they come back to China, this dream of Europe, they become shocked and fall into a depression. So there is a specific like crisis groups for returning Chinese from vacation in Europe, being so disappointed and being so depressed, seeing Paris, seeing London, seeing all of these Venetian, Italy, that they fall into a depression. So so they don't realize also that China has become a leader in so many ways. So that is actually a big realization for the Chinese also when they travel abroad. And as you know, they travel also abroad more than ever. But no, it is an interesting thing, and I think Europe has been in this trap where we joke about, US have innovated, Chinese have imitated, and in the Europe we have regulated. So we don't create value in Europe. We sit and discuss how to regulate these innovations and these imitations, but China has moved up the ladder, going from imitating to innovating. So now US is innovating, China is innovating, but we're still stuck in the middle trying to regulate things instead of creating actual value. So now we're trying to be like, oh, how do we do with this now? No, we need to put higher taxes on EVs because otherwise the Chinese EVs will kill our auto industry. And, so it feels like when I studied economics back then, we believed in, doing what you're supposed to be best at. We talked about, competitive advantages. Each country should focus on what it's good at. And the invisible hand, which is the market, will sort it out. Now, if I'm listening to what the Western world is talking about, they're talking about protectionism. They're talking about tariffs. And this is like a completely backward mentality. It has nothing to do in a market economy. Now we have a communist country on paper. They are talking about open trade, free trade, globalization. So the world is completely upside down now. How can China, the country that we have bashed for so long, now they are the main spokesperson for free trade and globalization, etc. So it's completely, I think, mind-blowing when you think about it, how fast this transition has gone. So I do think in a way that Europe pushing this narrative has given up on the fact on winning on products and services. So now we feel stuck that the only way we can win, which is of course not true, we can also, but we don't want to fight that race. We have been used to have been superiors with products and services, but now when China is sort of leveling up or being better, then we didn't have a remedy for this. And then we're just trying to desperately regulate these companies instead, which is completely the wrong strategy from my perspective. Instead of trying to, hinder your competitor, do something about yourself. I mean, if I have a Chinese competitor on my right side, I'm not trying to regulate him out of business. I'm trying to improve my business. What can I do to become better than him? But this is a mentality that I'm not seeing in Europe as for now. But I guess, Johan, that's what you're pointing at, right?
Yep.
One of the big domains that I have experienced in my travels of Silicon Valley is that strength in community. You can't compete against me. I want you to win as well. We have to raise the ships to elevate the water. We have to elevate the water to raise the ships. All these kinds of, how can I get you, bring you to a next level? And China was competition. 15 million MBA graduates per year, a high level of competition. You're either in the race or you're dead. Of this very high pressure. But more and more, I feel like even with community, they're catching up. Even with this mindset of we're in this together, we're fighting not against each other, but actually against the problem. Even there, they're becoming, they're changing, they're adapting, or they're probably then also leading because they're so open to this. How do you see this? Is this something you can confirm, or how is that happening?
Oh, completely. And this is something that they have been working on even since the Cultural Revolution, when Mao Zedong, when he unified China after the Civil War. So this is something that has been going on for a long time, where he put Mandarin first, regardless of all the hundreds of dialects that existed before in a very fragmented China that was not a unified China as we see it today. He put Mandarin first. He made it simple, more simple to learn. He added pinyin, which is the alphabetic, phonetic translation of all the characters in China. So he made it accessible for all the people to start learning and reading Mandarin. So, and that of course unified the country under one flag. So I think that they have done extremely well, and this you can see all the time, respecting barriers. I mean, I'm living in the heart of the Canton region, where Cantonese has always been for thousands of years the main language, but still people can switch between Mandarin and Cantonese like nothing. And in Shenzhen, as you know, it's being such a young city, here we speak Mandarin as a first language because most of the people come from another place. But yes, they in all the conversation between Chinese, one of the first questions that comes up is like, "Oh, which province are you from?" And then they talk about their different provinces, what food they eat there, blah blah blah. They understand the culture and local differences, but they both understand. They all understand that they are Chinese first. So something that the US did extremely well, uniting everybody under the American flag in such a good way, regardless background, religion. This was the superpower of the US, has now becoming something that they're not pushing any further. So they're scaring away immigrants, they're scaring away Chinese, etc., etc. And now, even in education in the US, as you can see, they are now blocking and making it harder, specifically for Chinese students to come into the US. And we see the same things in Europe, in Sweden, Germany, Poland, where the right wings are taking over, just polarizing us again. People moving out from the EU. What we need in Europe is also uniting. We need a strong European currency. We need stronger collaboration between the European countries when it comes to army, when it comes to economic, when it comes to education, when it comes to innovation, etc., etc., when it comes to energy policies. So we need to unite. The last thing we need in Europe now is talking about how I'm separating myself from the rest and how I'm supposed to, manage this by myself. Chinese strength has been, they have been uniting 1.5 billion people under one flag, working towards one goal. And that has made them unstoppable for the last 30, 40 years. And then another thing, coming back to the Chinese, I think they also have an ability with their current political system that they can plan long term. They present their 5-year plans and they keep their 5-year plans. As in on our systems, we talk about the new elections for 2 years. We go out trying to get votes, and then we're trying to rule for 2 years. So our 4-year systems, we never actually get things done. So that stops us because in a different way. So I do believe that democracy is a fantastic way to rule, but it is under pressure also as a political system, I would say. And that's the most inconvenient discussion I think we have in Europe now. And that's why I think we have such a difficulty accepting that China has not a democracy as we have. How could they possibly be able to pull this off? And this is something I think that's where the real problem I think lays for us Europeans. You're thinking, Johan and Nikki?
Johan wanted to
So
say
yeah,
something.
I just react quickly on that because I think it was like 15 years ago. I was working for the European Commission, during my PhD so I had to review such kind of European project proposals, and there were these big debates when the project reached that final phase to decide, is it a go or no go? I mean, this was like hundreds of millions of euros. There was one meeting when I said, I really stood up against a project. So I was like the only one against it. And I said, like, it's not big enough. It could have much bigger goals. And then I said, like, okay, because the discussion reached a point when we were starting to argue, like how Europe could increase its competitiveness, how could we really become a leader in innovation. So I said, exactly what you said, because I took the example of the Netherlands, Germany, France, I mean, in the Netherlands, a government barely lasts more than a year because there are like 20 political parties. To reach a coalition agreement takes 1 year, and then they last for 6 months and then new elections. So how can you plan long term? You cannot. So I said, why we do not fix a certain number of technical fields and develop a 5-year goal, like, in healthcare devices, in AI. Because without a long-term goal, we're never going to win. You know what was the end result? They removed me as a project evaluator, so they kicked me out. No, this is not democratic. It's against our values, which is diversity, and so they removed me from the panel. And ever since, I was never invited to be a project evaluator. It's just a funny anecdote, that. And actually, I have a video on YouTube. I don't know if it was removed or not, with this proposal that we should fix a number of fields where at least there we try to reach a consensus among member states that okay, this is our goal for 5 years, and it's not going to change independently if the liberals come to power, conservatives, or some extremist government. But this should be fixed. So they removed me. Funny.
Yeah, it is a
The
funny
other
story, but yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to ask you, maybe you know more about it, because I love reading the news. So I daily I read, for instance, the China, so the South China Morning News.
Post.
I read it every single day. You read something about a very top European scientist moving to China. So today the news was about a very famous AI chip expert, quantum computing expert from the UK, who left University of Oxford and moved to China. How is China, I mean, on a scientific level, so I'm talking about universities, able to attract these people? Do they offer extremely high competitive packages, like, I don't know, 1 million per year, like we hear from the US, free housing? How do they manage?
I think, like you're saying, I remember when I studied at Tsinghua University, which is sort of like one of the better universities in China. This was 2003 when I did my last year of my MBA. And at that time, Tsinghua had a collaboration with MIT. And all my professors, I was astonished also. They were all from MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, all over the world. And I was also thinking like, wow, how is this possible? But yeah, I think it all comes down to compensation, like you're saying. And when I moved to Shenzhen a few years later, half of Shenzhen was full of Swedish people, ex Ericsson people that just been recruited to Huawei. And the packages that they received were ridiculous. And I know it's the same thing for the auto industry. A lot of the German engineers from BMW, Mercedes-Benz, etc., they all were drafted to the Chinese auto companies because Chinese are very pragmatic. Instead of paying or doing whatever, they just took over the know-how. I remember when Huawei, they set up their main office in Stockholm, just 50 meters in front of the Ericsson office in Kista, Stockholm. And from there on, they just posted, oh, an engineer for this type of work in Sweden, say it earned, I don't know, at that time, say $6,000-7,000 a month. Here come the Chinese offered for the same position for Huawei, triple. So, so people just like quickly started to move over, and then, like you're saying, the packages that they received here, coming over for a couple of years, it was almost too good to say no to. So that's why I think how this aggressive way of recruiting worked for them. But now I think they have, and they're sitting on all the IP now. So that's why a lot of these people left now from the automotive industry, from the tech industry. And now instead you have these returning Chinese Ivy League students that come in the hundreds of thousands every year that graduate from these universities globally. Before US and the West, they were able to keep these talents in the US and in Europe. But now they don't feel that there's any use, or the attractiveness and that gravitation is no longer there. So now they choose to come back to China. So I think that is a big topic that not too many people talk about, and Trump specifically don't realize the loss of this happening now, because a lot of these companies that they have in the US as for now are actually talents that came from otherwhere and studied in the US and stayed in the US. So I think this last thing that he's doing now with trying to block more students to the US, it's going to further hurt the long-term possibilities for the US to innovate. So I think we haven't seen US fall to rock bottom yet. So I think the long-lasting effects of what is happening now in the US will be very, very severe and long-lasting. And also combining that with the debt that they're having, combined with what China is having, they're sitting on record savings now. China has the opposite of a problem. They're just bulking money, as US now have the greatest debt in the history of their country. So when China is ready to spend again, they have the money. So that's why, again, when China is going to feel more trust in the future, the acceleration is going to happen way faster compared to the Europe and in the US.
You just reminded me when I mean, yearly, I mean, not with Nikki because we never did Meta, but yearly I went to Meta visit. They have a 1 kilometer long building. Almost all of the employees I saw were Chinese, just to say that. And they have, I think, in that 1 kilometer building, 4 or 5 Chinese restaurants inside the building. So I thought I'm in China.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm giving space.
This is the reality.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah,
sure.
Thanks.
To see you.
Hi, Folke. Thanks a lot for the inspiring talk.
Hello.
Even if I haven't been in China, it's very nice to hear about it, and I'm glad to hear all these positive things that are happening there. I am coming from mathematics education, and I'm interested in the trend that is currently in education in China. What are the main principles that they are following? If you have some insight into this domain.
Come again? I missed the last part.
So the second part of the question related to the main principles that they are following in education. What are the values? What are their main goals that they want to achieve?
I think, again, they're business pragmatic. So they're very driven by financial prosperity, since they're first generation wealth. So all of the people that you're seeing here in China, their parents grew up poor. So I think they're extremely driven by, and I think a lot of East European countries can relate to this. I know I have had some Polish people here that sort of like, they still remember communism, and they remember how the food and etc. It was like distributed, so wealth didn't matter. So they understand scarcity in a different way. So I think all of the Chinese, even the rich now, they remember how it was growing up poor. So I think they're extremely driven by not ending up in that situation again. So financial freedom, I think, is something that motivates Chinese very, very much. That's why they have this Zhou Liu, like 996 culture, working from 9 to 9 every day, 6 times a week type of mentality, because they rather work hard than being poor. And that's also something that we have become fatter and happier in Europe and more lazy and lazy. We're talking about working less, and here we have the Chinese talking about just working more and harder in general. Now the new generation are not as crazy about working hard, but we still have like a lot of people that are still willing to work much harder, I would say, than the average European. So of course that comes to the cost of putting what we call, or what you're asking for, these softer values maybe are less prioritized compared to the actual outcome in terms of financial.
I've seen two things on education in the China tours, and I thought it was really interesting. So when I came to China for the first time about 30 years ago, when I was studying, I was taught that the individual doesn't count at all. Like it's not, the individual is not important. A person dies, next day another person takes over the job and no one cares. And you also don't care about yourself so much as the European. So just to share where they're coming from. Fast forward to 2024, 5, 6, I've seen two things. One is an AI company wrote the curriculum on AI education. I thought it's really interesting that the companies who are working on AI since time have a whole curriculum for high school students to learn AI. So it's not only that AI is there, it's also kind of how the companies are interfering. And the second thing that I observed this time is that we went to the Museum of Science and Technology, I think is the name, and there were, to our bad experience, to be honest, there were about 5,000. It felt like 5,000 students, pupils, with the classes, and it was really noisy. But they were all wearing uniform, and I thought it's also interesting that they put I don't know if that's standard and normal, but everyone, like, you could really separate who belongs together because they were all wearing uniform.
Yeah. No, of course. I mean, yeah, the uniform part is something that I also feel in that's a reaction. Many times when I get the European companies and people here, they sort of pity the students, like, oh, poor students, they have to wear a uniform. But for me, as a parent having two kids, 10 and 12, for me, that's sort of a blessing, because I know also the social pressure that comes with having your own private clothes in school. And I know in Europe now the pressure of having the right brands and the right clothes is higher than ever. And we didn't know what the Prada bag was when I was 12, 13. Maybe that came in my late teens, to have a Levi's jeans or whatever it was. But now it has gone down such in a young age. So I do feel that they're letting the kids be kids here for way longer than in Europe. And I think the uniform part is giving them a sense of belongingness, but also in general, like, I feel like the kids are way more innocent than maybe our kids are back home, for good and bad. But to be honest, I do think it's good. I think that the kids are growing up and have an eagerness to become grown up too fast back home, I would say.
You just tackled the topic, and I would take this as a closing topic to compare China from your observation with Europe, and that's
Sure.
depression. Depression has outnumbered obesity as a global disease. So mental sanity must be an issue everywhere. And I feel like we're not doing really well in Europe because everyone's on their own. And it's kind of the flip side of socialistic systems where the state takes care of people, that people don't take care of each other, so everyone's on their own and deal with it. And I don't know about the US, but how do you observe mental sanity and what people are doing for each other and in the process in China to stay mentally sane?
I think here again, as China is like now the first generation of real wealth, I think that's they are in the same position where maybe our parents were, meaning that our parents maybe didn't discuss, fatigueness or being outworked or whatever. It was something that maybe our parents sort of didn't believe in. That was sort of like nobody that doesn't exist, and you didn't talk about it. So I think sort of that's where China is at that phase, more or less, sort of like in the first phase, or maybe acknowledging that oh, there is something that is called outburned, or burned out, or something like this. So but as anything else here, this awareness has also probably grown very fast. So I do think like both physical and mental healthness has risen quite drastically uh, throughout the last 10 years. 10 years ago, you didn't see a gym anywhere, and now you see every other Chinese going to a gym, and gyms are popping up like everywhere. So they are now realizing like having a good physique is also good. It's also good when you combine it with mental health. So even though, yes, they are in the first phase, I wouldn't be surprised that they would sort of combine that with innovation and with AI and have the best solution to tackle this problem. Because I do think probably it's way worse if you would dig a little bit deep down here. I do believe that they are not immune to this type of problem either, but it's just still a little bit taboo. They don't believe in it. They don't talk about it. You suck it up, and then you go on, sort of like our parents did. But then you have our generation now. You have all of us, which I think maybe it's a little bit too much. I think like 20% of us, or even more, like feeling in one way or another burned out, or overworked, or too sensitive, too triggered. So maybe it's gone too far, maybe in the West. But I think let's see how it turns out here.
One very last question, a topic that I should have asked a lot earlier. When I started the program, I went to Hong Kong, and then I thought, okay, we're so close to Shenzhen, let's have a day in Shenzhen. And then last year I realized that this has flipped, and now the focus is on Shenzhen, and we have one day in Hong Kong. How do you see those two poles? Shenzhen feels a lot more European actually than Hong Kong does, and Hong Kong used to be the entry drug to China. How do you see the roles, the dynamics between Shenzhen and Hong Kong? Both are the most, I would say, the key players of the Greater Bay Area. So
Yeah, for sure. Together with Guangzhou, probably I would say. But no, I think obviously the dynamics it has shifted drastically. Before, Shenzhen was a place where a lot of Hong Kongese people almost frowned upon to visit. It's like, why would you go to Shenzhen? There's nothing in Shenzhen. And like you said, the elite and the money and the culture life, everything was in Hong Kong. And so even speaking Mandarin in Hong Kong was sort of something that people wouldn't respond. And so it was like Mandarin was also frowned upon almost. Now it's almost like the opposite. So now you have the Hong Kongese people invading Shenzhen every weekend because they have a higher standard here in Shenzhen, better food, better service, lower priced. So yes, that dynamic has changed drastically, I would say. So now if you go into any luxury store in Hong Kong, if they don't speak Mandarin, I think you're out of business. So I think they have realized that, okay, if we want to be keep ourselves relevant and popular, we need to cater to the mainland Chinese person, and specifically the Shenzhen neighbor. So I do think uh, mainlanders, or like China, is trying to integrate Hong Kong more and more. Now we had some pilot projects rolling out now where we can go with our private cars going into Hong Kong. Before, you had to have a second plate on your car to be able to enter Hong Kong. But now they're trying to roll out these pilot programs that we just can apply a day before, and we can travel into Hong Kong with our car. And on the other end, we will also soon be trying out these pilots where we have international internet here on the Shenzhen side, same as Hong Kong. So we don't need VPN here. So they're trying to sort of make the gap less and less. So the transition shouldn't be so harsh as it has been before. But I think it's also like it's the same as the West has had to realize that China has become what it has become. I think it's for the Hong Kongese, they're also sort of stuck in the middle where they feel that their identity as a sort of like the superior being in terms of being a Hong Kongese, not a Chinese person. They also have that identity crisis now where they are merged back into China. They're 25 plus years in. And in the next coming 20 years, they have said that the currency will also merge with the Chinese renminbi. So it's going to be interesting to see how. I think the most extreme Hong Kongese people that rejected this merge back, I think they've already left. So I think the Hong Kongese that are still there now are embracing the unity in a way more open way than the other people. But so that's sort of the dynamic that I'm seeing now.